I'll just accept Estival as a speaker as well. Brigo also, feel free. The best thing of these kind of spaces is okay. In the meanwhile, I'll read you guys a short poem by Rumi. It's called Beauty and Love. All through eternity, beauty unveils her exquisite form in the solitude of nothingness. She holds a mirror to her face and beholds her own beauty. She is the knower and the known, the seer and the seen. No eye but hers own has ever looked upon this universe. Hers every quality finds an expression. Eternity becomes the verdant field of time and space. Love, the life-giving garden of this world. Every branch and leaf and fruit reveals an aspect of her perfection. The cypress gives hint of her majesty. The rose gives tidings of her beauty. Whenever beauty looks, love is also there. Whenever beauty shows a rosy cheek, love lights her fire from that flame. When beauty dwells in the dark folds of night, love comes and finds a heart entangled in tresses. Beauty and love are as body and soul. Beauty is the mine, love is the diamond. They have together, since the beginning of time, side by side, step by step. So quite an idealistic poem, uh, kind of hinting at the form of beauty in the form of um, love. Okay, what do you think, Zara? Should we go on more?
Yeah, let's continue. It looks like maybe the recording will work on the live stream. Maybe it won't, but let's just continue with what we've got.
Yeah, okay. So this was just a warm-up one. I organized here a bunch of 10 poems, so let's go through them. So the first one is called Exordium, the Song of the Reed. Okay, before I start, so the reed is and the reed bed is a metaphor Rumi likes to use to employ. So the reed, while it is on the reed bed, it's a metaphor to our souls before they were embodied in our flesh. Our souls were connected to a bigger whole. While when we were conceived and born, our souls became apparently detached from that reed bed. And Rumi also likes the reed because the reed can become a flute with several holes, and human beings also have several holes. And our hollowness also speaks about the yearning for something more complete, some completeness, connection, and meaning. Of course, an allusion to the source of all, or God, or Allah. So it goes like this. Now listen to this reed flute's deep lament about the heartache being apart has meant. Since from the reed bed they uprooted me, my songs expressed each human's agony. A breast which separations split in two is what I seek, to share this pain with you. When I kept from their true origin, all yearn for union on the day they can return. Amongst the crowd, alone I mourn my fate. With good and bad, I've learned to integrate. That we were friends, each one was satisfied, but none sought out my secrets from inside. My deepest secrets in this song I wail, but eyes and ears can penetrate the veil. Body and soul are joined to form one whole, but no one is allowed to see the soul. It's not just hot air, the reed's flutes cry. If you don't have this fire, then you should die. Love's fire is what makes every reed flute pine. Love's fervor thus lends potency to wine. The reed consoles those forced to be apart. Its notes will lift the veil upon your heart. Wears antidote or poison like its son, or confidant, or one who's pined so long. This reed relates a tortuous path ahead, recalls the love with which Majnun's heart bled. The few who hear the truths the reed has sung have lost their wits, so they can speak his tongue. The day is wasted if it's spent in grief, consumed by burning aches without relief. Good times have long passed, but we couldn't care. While ordinary men on drops can thrive, a fish needs ocean daily to survive. The way the ripe must feel the raw can't tell. My speech must be concise, and so farewell. Hey guys, feel free to request microphone and chat and comment, or simply react to what was just read, and feel free to take advantage of the intervals between poems to do so. So the next one is called Only Breath. And goes like this. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist. Am not an entity in this world or the next. Did not descend from Adam or Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one and that one called two and now. First, last, outer, inner. Only that breath, breathing human being. Okay, and Zara, you mentioned you have some reading material as well, so feel free to interject and present this material as well. I'm kind of enthused to listen to what you brought as well.
Okay, so what I have here is an essay that's written on mysticism, and we talked about there being two main schools of thought in academia regarding ways of perennial. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the opposing idea is called constructivism. So let's see. This is just a survey of the ideas really quickly, but let's read a little of this essay here. The author says, Anthony Flew defines mysticism as, quote, direct or unmediated experience of the divine in which the soul momentarily approaches union with God. 1979. In 2005, Oxford English Dictionary the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy states that mysticism is the, quote, belief in union with the divine nature by means of the power of spiritual access to ultimate reality or to the domains of knowledge closed off to ordinary thought. Religious scholar Ninian Smart proposes that mysticism is, quote, those inner visions and practices which are contemplative. It's a very different definition. The problem with this is that although contemplation may characterize mystical practice and tradition, the essentially mystical experience is itself characterized by a quietude or peace contrary to contemplation of the essence Robert Foreman referred to as the, quote, pure consciousness experience. In Smart's characterization, we find the constructivist bias, the opposite impulse. All right, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article, Mysticism, by Jerome Gelman, is taken from his chapter in Oxford Handbook of Philosophy of Religion on mysticism. He says, a purportedly super sense perceptual or sub-sense perceptual unitive experience granting acquaintance of realities or states of affairs that are of a kind not accessible by way of sensory perception, somatosensory modalities, or standard introspection, right? So it's removing introspection as the path that could get there as well. Okay, more specifically, the English philosopher Walter Stace distinguished two universal mystical states found, quote, in all cultures, religions, periods, and social conditions. These two are the extrovertive and introvertive paths to, quote, the unitive experience of the one. While the former achieves unity by going out through multiplicity, looking outward through the senses, the introvertive monistic experience looks inward into the mind to achieve pure consciousness, quote unquote, devoid of phenomenal content. Both achieve oneness as sacred objectivity. Okay, so that's the introduction. And we see the two different impulses of the two academic approaches to understanding what might be going on here. But it's significant that they point out that that there are two mystical traditions that exist universally in humanity. So it's in every culture, in every people group, every social class. You can find evidence of both of these traditions. So the two academic approaches for comprehending these are perennialism and constructivism. So let's learn about perennialism. The term philosophia perennis was first popularized by Leibniz, who took it from the 16th century theologian Augustinus Stuckius's 1540 work. Stuckius used it to describe the, quote, originally revealed absolute truth made available to man before his fall, completely forgotten in that lapse, and only gradually regained in fragmentary form in the subsequent history of human thought. Leibniz used it to describe what was needed to complete his own system, his own philosophical system. He called it an analysis of the truth and falsehood of all philosophies, ancient and modern, by which one would, quote, draw the gold from the dross, the diamond from its mine, the light from the shadows. And this would be, in effect, a kind of perennial philosophy. So this is where we get perennialism. It's very similar to some of the stuff we've talked about in our Consummate Thinkers course, and also when we were discussing mysticism. So we understand what Leibniz is aiming at. Let's go on. As an ideal aim, the perennial philosophy has a more universal history. For instance, in speaking of the existence of the soul after death, the Roman statesman Cicero stated that he had the authority of all antiquity on his side when he said, quote, these things are of old date and have, besides, the sanction of universal religion. Alexandrian inspirer of Plotinus and the Neoplatonic movement, Anomius Saccas in the 3rd century CE, had a similar goal of reconciling different religious philosophies. Renaud Fabry's article, Introduction to the Perennialist School, says, quote, the ideal of such a philosophy is much older, and one can easily recognize it in the golden chain of Neoplatonism, in the patristic lex primordialis of the Islamic din al-fitri, or even in the Hindu Sanatana Dharma, the Sanatana Dharma. Although this last connection has been the subject of debate between Swami Vivekananda and Advaiti Vedantin religious scholars. I think it meant to say and those scholars like Fritjof Schaun and George Frustein. Okay. Also, as an ideal aim, the great logician and father of pragmatism, Charles Sanders Peirce, in the introduction to the principles of philosophy, expressed his outline of, quote, a theory so comprehensive that for a long time to come, the entire work of human reason in philosophy of every school and kind, in mathematics and in psychology, in physical science, in history, in sociology, and in whatever other department there may be, shall appear as the filling up of details. Okay, so we're looking, this is really clear now, right? We're looking at this, basically what we talked about in our other classes, approaching the arche, right? So what Thales was aimed at, what Socrates was talking about, what Descartes, largely quoting Socrates, was talking about, what the medieval philosophers called the face of God, what the ancient Greeks called the arche, the source of all being and goodness. What they're saying is, if we had a science of that or a philosophy of that, then all of the other subjects would be understood as explorations of various facets of understanding the cosmos as a whole, because what would be aimed at is the entirety, right? If it's the source of all being, then its imprint is on every detail of being. Okay, fine. So let's move on. As an ideal rather than a product, a perennial philosophy has never been formulated in complete detail and with final perfection, unquote. The ordinary use of the term philosophia perennis, or perennial philosophy, does not necessarily indicate an ideal aim, although it may be implied. But instead, it tends to indicate an end product, a school of thought unifying the disparate religions, seeing their differences as mere surface feature, most pronounced in mysticism. Constructivists, the other approachers to mysticism, constructivists will dispute the actuality of ideal states, whether or not they're actually things that are manifest, wisely suggesting that claims of actually experiencing pure or transcendental states of experience, consciousness, or being are not empirically verifiable. In the ordinary sense, certainly not in the sense naturalism and empirical science and metaphysically materialism seeks. But mystics recognize that there is a higher validation which cannot be represented. For if merely represented, articulated, or expressed, it loses its meaning. Right? This is something that we're finding as a pretty common theme, right? You can hear it when you talk to various types of mystics, or even Rumi when he's describing what it is he's accomplishing. He says, after I'm done and I'm done spinning and I'm found these words were poured into me and they're done, then I sit and I wonder why I ever used words at all, why I ever looked to words at all in the first place. Right. And so you can even, well, you hear it whenever you hear anybody talking about this type of grand unification accomplishment. Of course, we've been comprehending mysticism as an attempt to get to that type of an experience and to provide a way of inducing it in the reader as well. So a mystical text or a mystical work like Rumi's poems are attempting to do that. When people talk about it, they often say it's not propositional. If you reduce it to propositions, you're missing the point. It's experiential. It's a smack in the face, like smashing yourself up against the cosmos as a whole, or the arche. Okay. So this validation is that of being it, rather than of merely seeing it. It is called knowledge through identity. We talked about that in our mythopoetry class as well. The idea of relational knowledge is simultaneously knowledge of the world and knowledge of self at the same time. And I said primarily because it's relational. They're drawing this being thing out as the distinction here, and maybe they've got a better point than I do. But it seems that when you get to know a person, in a friendship or a romantic relationship or in any way, as you get to know them, what you're really discovering is what makes them different from you, because you might just assume those other things. But as you get to the bottom of your conversations and your wrestling matches of trying to comprehend one another, your knowledge of them as you gain it is simultaneously knowledge of yourself. So he's referring to that as the phrase knowledge through identity. But what it is knowledge of, all right, but what it is knowledge of is not anything that can be called an object, but rather the very objectivity that is manifested in all objects. That's well put. It can be called a certainty, perhaps, but in any case, it is a circumstance that needs to re-enter academic discussion for a better appreciation of the purity of mystical experience, and to be explicit of its place in the hierarchy of knowledge. This latter need is sought by metaphysics in its ideal aim beyond the material. And we talked earlier when we started this course that there are various paths of mysticism. And so when he's talking about metaphysical philosophy, that's not exactly mysticism, right? Because it can be propositional if it's philosophical. If it's rightly philosophy, then it's propositional, it's dialectic, it's argumentative, it's analytical, it's trying on purpose specifically for the aim of getting the words correct, having a statement that could be true or false and refining it until it's correct. However, as we saw in our Consummate Thinkers course, Socrates, Thales, Descartes, Nietzsche, these philosophers were conscious of the fact that even though they were doing philosophy, they were actually synthesizing a relational, experiential kind of knowledge at the same time. That they were, Socrates in the Phaedo says explicitly, it's fun and it's great that we've been arguing and trying to get our ideas correct. But, the real purpose of all of this was that we could relate. He uses the word relationship, that we could get to know the sun, the source of all truth, being, goodness, beauty, justice, and that we could get to know it in a relational way so that we're familiar with it, family-like. And then we would take that knowledge into the world and look for things that participate in those qualities because we know the source of them. And Descartes said the same thing, and we don't have to go into all of that. But the idea is that philosophical metaphysics is, maybe that's one of those lesser sciences in this schema that's being displayed here. If well, you've got to work out the propositional descriptors of it as well, and that's important. But mysticism is not trying to do that. Mysticism is almost like what Socrates was doing without the philosophy. And what it's saying is, look, what Rumi says is, let me just get up and spin around when I feel the inspiration and shout out the lines that come to me. And perhaps we'll get to the direct experience that we're talking about, right? So this is giving us a clear idea of mysticism. And again, we said there's mysticism in the Phaedo, there's mysticism in Descartes' Meditations, and it can be accomplished in ways other than poetic. It can be accomplished philosophically. There are books about mystical accomplishment that can be attained through religious discipline, right? When the book says fast for this week and say this prayer, it's not saying the mystical experience is that fasting. It's saying do these things and maybe you can get to that place. But with what we've been looking at so far with Rumi, and we're going to be looking at some other mystics in the future, are texts of poetry or prose that are crafted by the author or maybe divinely inspired to try to induce the experience in us as if we had been fasting or as if we had gone through the philosophical comprehension. Okay, let's move back to this. In recent times, Aldous Huxley's 1945 book, The Perennial Philosophy, popularized this pole of interpretation called perennialism for the public in the name of that title. Huxley called this the highest common factor, which is not only of divine inspiration and origin, but shares the same metaphysical principles. Before Huxley's popularization of the term, French author, I got lost here, hold on, I'm sorry. French author René Guénon wrote at length about the Sophia Perennis, the eternal wisdom, or primordial tradition. Guénon has inspired Fritjof Schuon, as well as the Ceylonese scholar Ananda Kumaraswamy, who are also, so the Sri Lankan, right? Ceylonese changed to Sri Lankan. Anyway, who are also considered founding members of the esoteric traditionalist school of perennialism in the interwar period. I have no idea about that history, but that's something to look into. Okay. Huxley called this the highest common factor, which is not only of divine inspiration. All right, why don't we pause there in our reading? Typically, so far, this is our 6th class. We haven't done any scholarly reading, although we talked about some of the concepts in our first class. Typically, what we've been doing is focusing on reading Rumi's poems and just sort of letting them wash over us. So what I'm going to ask Roger to do, if he's willing, is to read us the next 2 poems, and then we'll go back to this essay and we'll continue to work through it, and then we'll discuss the ideas in it.
Sure thing. Okay, so the next one is called Who Says Words with My Mouth? So exploring here the interaction between language and experience. Okay, so who says words with my mouth? All day I think about it. Then at night I say it. Where did I come from? And what am I supposed to be doing? I have no idea. My soul is from elsewhere, I'm sure of that. And I intend to end up there. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. When I get back around to that place, I'll be completely sober. Meanwhile, I'm like a bird from another continent, sitting in this aviary. The day is coming when I fly off. But who is it now in my ear who hears my voice? Who says words with my mouth? Who looks out with my eyes? What is the soul? I cannot stop asking. If I could taste one sip of an answer, I could break out of this prison for drunks. I didn't come here of my own accord, and I can't leave that way. Whoever brought me here will have to take me home. This poetry, I never know what I'm going to say. I don't plan it. When I'm outside the saying of it, I get very quiet and rarely speak at all. Okay, so he even ends the poem with commentary on the poem and his typical experience of how his poems flow from him. The next one is Talking in the Night. Okay, Talking in the Night. In the middle of the night, I cried out, who lives in this love I have? You said, I do, but I'm not here alone. Why are these other images with me? I said, they are reflections of you, just as the beautiful inhabitants of Chigil in Turkestan resemble each other. You said, but who is this other living being? That is my wounded soul. Then I brought that soul to you as a prisoner. This one is dangerous, I said. Don't let him off easy. You winked and gave me one end of a delicate thread. Pull it tight, but don't break it. I touched my hand to touch you. You struck it down. Why are you so harsh with me? For good reason, but certainly not to keep you away. Whoever enters this place saying, here I am, must be slapped. This is not a pen for sheep. There are no separating distances here. This is love's sanctuary. Saladin is how the soul looks. Rub your eyes and look again with love at love. You said, who's at the door? I said, your slave. You said, what do you want? To see you and bow. How long will you wait? Until you call. How long will you cook? Till the resurrection. We talk through the door. I claim the great love, and that I had given up that what the world gives to be in that love. You said, such claims require a witness. I said, this longing, these tears. You said, discredited witnesses. I said, surely not. You said, who did you come with? The majestic imagination you gave me. Why did you come? The musk of your wine was in the air. What is your intention? Friendship. What do you want from me? Grace. Then you asked, where have you been most comfortable? In the palace. What did you see there? Amazing things. then why is it so desolate? Because all that can be taken away in a second. Okay, Zara, feel free to interject.
That was really good. All right, so let's wrap up what he's talking about with perennialism here. Huxley called this the highest common factor, quote, which is not only of divine inspiration and origin, but shares the same metaphysical principles. You see, so this is a wild idea, right? The idea isn't that you've got a correct conception. It's that you're interacting with the thing so directly that your understanding of it is direct comprehension of the nature of being or the cosmos or the divine or however you want to put it. Okay. Before Huxley's popularization of the term, French author René Guénon wrote at length about the Sophia Perennis. I feel like we read this already. Hold on a minute. The primordial tradition. The ensuing school of thought is called traditionalism. Although the basic tenet of traditionalism is that it is immemorial and found in all, quote, authentic traditions, unquote, and has much in common with the ancient Hindu Sanatana, the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal doctrine, Guénon has inspired Fritjof Schuon as well as the Ceylonese scholar. I really feel like we read this already. Okay, hold on. The necessity. Okay, here we go. Anti-perennialists, so people who are against this position, will dispute the achievement or actuality of ideal states, wisely suggesting that claims of pure transcendence. I feel like they've really just copy-pasted themselves. I'm sorry about that. All right. So we have the debate. Obviously, we have the debate. The debate is between the two camps of thought, and we talked about the fictilian psychological camps that all philosophers fall into. The first camp are the ones who get their identity. It's a psychological camp, right? They get their identity from their ability to measure, predict, and manipulate a material, objective world outside of themselves. That's where they get their sense of self. And so all their valuable ideas, the ideas that are valuable to them, are working in that direction. And we have a host of philosophers that come to mind when we think of that. And then the other fictilian camp is also psychological camp, is the camp of philosophers who get their identity. It's still psychological. They get their identity from their ability to interact with, comprehend, manipulate, understand, relate to ideas that are internal to themselves, right? So it's a distinction that emerges in the Thales to Socrates era, the Socrates, the medieval era, the post-Cartesian era, and it emerges as an Anaximander versus an Anaximenes, or as the rationalists versus the empiricists, or right. It's the exact same division that keeps happening right after you get a thinker who is a consummate thinker who's attempting to really unite the two. Is you get these two camps that are going in these opposite directions of trying to and failing to fully grasp the entirety of it and relying on one of the two vocabularies available to them. Spinoza said we have two vocabularies available to us. And with either one, we can describe all of the phenomena and how they relate to each other in the cosmos. The first one is the objective language, right? The chair, as understood as length, breadth, width, located in time and space, with a certain impenetrability and all of these, reflecting a certain wavelength of light, right? You can describe the chair and everything else in that type of terminology. But the other option is the vocabulary of subjective, what the chair means to me, its representation in my mind, the thought of it as modeled as tool or obstacle or something that's in my way or can be used by me or something like that, as an extension of how it would relate to personalities as they move characterologically through the cosmos. And all of that subjective, again, by subjective, we don't mean I just feel like this is true. What we mean is how the world is to personalities and characters that are in the world, and from that other language. So we can think of the two fictilian psychological camps. But we can also think about them as just preferring one of the two available languages that Spinoza pointed out that we have to describe being. The world can be thought of as a stage on which matter moves around with a certain amount of energy in 3 dimensions, or it can be thought of as a stage on which characters act and move and relate to one another as they go from point A to point B. Okay. With that distinction in mind, the perennialists clearly are trying to understand these mystical texts that are a universal, as was pointed out. They're a human universal, that there are these traditions of ways of having what people describe as total knowledge or oneness with the universe, and all these different types of terminology that they try to use. And they often say, look, you can't really put it into terminology, because when you do that, it's wrong to some degree. And so they're understanding it that way. The opposing perspective is the constructivist camp, which is, of course, in vogue right now in academia, but that doesn't recommend it to us. It just happens to be the case. And the constructivist camp is going to be from the other group of philosophers. And so they're saying, look, you can't measure this. You can't put it under a microscope. It seems meaningless to me, because I only regard as meaningful those things that have measurable consequences. And so, we've pointed out the insufficiency of that approach, and it's an extremely valuable approach. And we've talked about the fact that it can build you spaceships and all sorts of things if you model the world that way. However, it's based in fiction, and it's also incapable of even approaching some of the most basic questions that we have immediate, constant evidence and experience of in our daily lives. We just can't publish it because we can't convince anybody else through propositional language that it's true. The fact that it's like something to see green, or it's like something to see red, is completely science can't make any progress on why it's like something. They can say, well, you have a survival advantage if you can identify a difference between things that are colored this way or that way, and that's fine. But it can't say anything about the quality of the experience. Why should pain feel like something rather than just be a message to move or something like that? So I only bring that up to point out the limitations of that language. And from our other class, we basically were saying either of these languages is insufficient, and that the synthesis of both of them is what we might understand, that the synthesis of both of them. Well, Hegel said if you could synthesize both those languages, it would be the end of history, because we'd have nowhere to go after that. In our Consummate Thinkers course, we say, no, it's like orgasm. You can the two opposing or opposite principles of masculinity and femininity, given enough friction, can achieve a momentary oneness. It's just you can't live there continually. You have to then dissolve into the two distinct principles that make this whole project up again. And like that's an analogy, but also, since we're talking about the arche, we should expect that every aspect of being would be a reflection of this thing. Like that, both of these languages might be insufficient, and that maybe it's possible to temporarily synthesize them in a certain thinker or in a certain time and project. And what all of that is to say, that what we can imagine, if we want to, as modeling the purpose of a mystical text, is to do that. Rumi's poems are designed to bring us to a consummation, to a unification with the cosmos, through the process of him saying them, through the process of us reading them and meditating on them. Now, he may fail, he may succeed, and that's all up for debate. It may not be possible for such a thing to be done by anybody, or it may be something that the reason why all these traditions exist in all these different cultures is that it is possible, and that's why people aim at it. I mean, we're not drawing a conclusion on those questions. We're saying those are legitimate questions for us to discuss on the academic side of this class. But all of that to say, let's look at the constructivist approach. And here's their answer to the question when they look at this. They say, in the context of the contemporary scholarly studies of mysticism, constructivism denotes the conceptual and cultural and religious and cognitive linguistic context or construction of the mystical experience. It could also be called pluralism or contextualism. The tendency of constructivists and anti-perennialists is to avoid the perceived problems with perennialism's conflation of religious views, which is good, but by claiming that mystical experiences differ from context to context, which misses the essence of the mystical experience as an ideally unconditioned experience of pure consciousness or subjectivity itself. More precisely, anti-perennialism, going by the name of constructivism, profits from, quote, a contemporary paradigm shift in epistemology toward the view that there are no human experiences except through the socio-linguistic relations which mediate them. Representatives of mystical constructivism are Stephen Katz, Robert Gemello, Hans Penner, and Wayne Proudfoot. Katz's basic and repeated claim is that there are no pure, unmediated experiences. In the words of secular religious studies pioneer Ninian Smart, quote, experiences are always in some degree interpreted. They, as it were, contain interpretations within them. No perception can be quite neutral. All right, so this is their way of denying a universal religious experience. Let's see how far that goes. The general argument for mystical constructivism is that all experience is constructed, involving at least some concepts, which are themselves determined by the socio-linguistic and cultural context, among a myriad of other factors. And so mystical experiences must differ from context to context. So they're making a prediction. That's good. We could test it. And mystic to mystic. Stephen Katz has focused on, quote, the pre-experiential conditions of the mystic's circumstance and how this experiential pattern informs the resultant experience. These are noble causes, assuming there is no access to the transcendental, or that mystics don't generally have that access. The essential problem with this view is that it appears true, and for the descriptive or interpretive, or even just the expressive level, for all practical purposes, it is true. But it implies that there cannot be that sort of purity ever achieved in the world by a mediator or whatever. Furthermore, this assumption is found to be true when analyzing it with the gross tools of thought stationed in the world, to which we are accustomed. The mediator's goal is to refine the understanding of the world and its constituent thoughts, the mind, enough to come into contact with or to realize what was already there, the transcendentally unique, empty set of experiences, sometimes identified with the true self, pure subjectivity. Of course, interpretation is contextual. But mystical experience is supposed to be an attempt at decontextualization, indirect, unmediated experience, with the goal of a state of pure, contentless, and so contextless experience. Robert Foreman has developed this idea and calls it a pure consciousness event or experience. The pure consciousness event is an alleged emptying out of all experiential content and phenomenological qualities. Constructivists have argued that pure consciousness events are impossible because of, quote, the kinds of beings that we are, unquote. One should certainly suspect the possibility of idealization of the purity of the experience in the sense that it may mislead us. Certainly, defenders of the pure consciousness event may be exaggerating their claims, although this does not discount the possibility of PCEs. Furthermore, the meaning of pure consciousness events may depend on one's definition of consciousness. The founder of the phenomenological movement, Husserl, for instance, denies the possibility of consciousness, not of anything. Unintentional consciousness is impossible, he says. All consciousness is intentional. My conclusion regarding mystical constructivism or pluralism is that it is certainly relevant at the descriptive and interpretive level when discussing mysticism in general. Its historical appearance was necessitated by the rampant epistemological naivete and academic irresponsibility of the overwhelmingly perennialist mystical literature. The worst problem with certain influential pieces of perennialist literature was their uncritical, to say the least, representation of original sources. They distorted the translations to make them seem identical. For example, quote, in Mysticism East and West, Rudolf Otto misrepresented Shankara and transformed Meister Eckhart into a sort of Shankaran Neoplatonius. Huxley quoted little bits and pieces from one mystic after another, making them all something like Advantinus. Perennialists lost what differentiates these great traditions, unquote. But constructivism has its own problems. That mysticism is essentially conditioned by socio-linguistic concepts is an assumption. In Katz's words, there are no pure, experiences. It is essential to the meaning and import of mysticism that there are indeed pure, unmediated, unconditioned experiences, and furthermore, that it is verifiable in direct experience as possible. Meditation is the complement of mediation, and the attenuation of mediation by concentration is the essential characteristic of mediation. The clash between the perennialists and the anti-perennialists is a clash between a priori worldviews. The ageless debacle in understanding, the communication breakdown between the absolutists and relativists. Let's stop there for a second and just make a couple of comments quickly. So, first of all, that was really fantastic. I'm glad I found this essay. Secondly, I like that he has some credence to this constructivist perspective, because what we said from the beginning, when we were talking in our philosophy class about what the quality of philosophical language is and what this mythopoetic and mystical vocabulary might be able to do or purports to be able to do, we said that there's appropriate uses for either one, and that there are realms where one works and the other doesn't. Well, one of the problems, and this is really, I think this is a very, I could be wrong about this, but I think this is a very, very important safety line, a harness that you can put on yourself when you decide to go out into the speculative, mysterious realm. Because what happens is people go and they have an experience, and then when they come back and they try to make propositional comprehension of it, they think that the experience justifies a whole bunch of propositional statements. But the whole point is that the experience is in a dreamlike speculative realm, which means it's not the sort of thing that can be put into propositional form. And so the people who praise the perennialists, they praise these mystical experiences as sort of above language. And the important thing is, okay, you can do that so long as you don't forget that. Right? The problem would be to forget that and say, well, therefore, I now have a whole bunch of doctrines and propositions that I know are true because I've understood it correctly in a way that can be reduced to propositions. If you think you can extract propositions about these experiences from the experiences, then you go from being a perennialist immediately into the world where the constructivist criticisms are legitimate and you have to answer them. In other words, maybe I interpreted this experience according to the religion I was brought up in, or according to the books that I've read, and maybe they're not really a validation of those books or those propositions, but rather that those propositions were aiming at this thing, right? So you're not putting the propositions above the experience. You're remembering what the mystic is claiming. When you're to do the mysticism, you have to claim that it's kind of above language. And so what you don't want to do is then reduce it to language and say, I have proof from my experience that this proposition or this doctrine is correct. That would be a negation of the mystic's own attitude when they say there's something valuable there and go out into it, if that makes sense. So in any case, I'm going to shut up now and we'll open it up to a general discussion, and then we'll go back into reading Rumi's poems, and we'll open up a general discussion about the poems themselves again. And that's probably enough of the excerpt of the essay to read for today. But does anybody have any questions, comments, arguments about what we've talked about in this little bit of the essay that we read?
Wow, thanks for bringing that essay, Zara. I really enjoyed listening to it and learning about how, after all, Aldous Huxley was merely popularizing something that has a lot of more dense texts, and that there are critiques to the approach of these perennialists, and there are the constructivists, and the importance of using a safety court to avoid us committing epistemological problems or interpretation problems, inference problems, extrapolation problems. So yeah, we can share our mystical stories with one another, but that doesn't mean that just because we had a so-called mystical experience, it doesn't mean that we should go and found a religion based on that and claim that we have a privileged connection to the truth. That is very dangerous indeed. And perhaps there are many cults and sects that were created from this premise, basically.
Right.
Go ahead, Dave.
So, if sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. If I may interject really quickly, I think I agree with you. Now, it's possible that you do have, right? I mean, if the mystical approach is trying to get at a superior form of direct experiential knowledge, you would actually have that type of knowledge. Here's the fun way of drawing the line. It's that as soon as you think you can talk about it in a propositional way, you are now properly in the realm of philosophers and theologians who are the ones that are trying to work out the correct propositional ways of comprehending these things, right? So it's not that you have to say to yourself, well, I don't believe I have a cosmically significant understanding of the world, in if the word understanding means something like experiential, relational, phenomenal experience. How you can still have all of that and believe it and hold on to it, and that's great. But what you then do is you say, well, that's not enough, or it is enough for me, maybe, but I can't expect that to mean anything to anybody else. What I then have to do is say, well, I could be wrong in how I've comprehended what happened, and maybe I've put my own contextual, cultural, linguistic peculiarities onto it. So what I'll do is I'll try to extract propositional understanding out of it, but then I'll take it to the ethicists, I'll take it to the God philosophers, the theologians, the religious authorities, and I'll subject it properly, because it's a propositional statement, to the final adjudication of people who are playing in that linguistic game, and those are the philosophers and the theologians. If that makes sense, right? So you don't have to say, you can have a religious experience and call it a religious experience, and it can be the most valuable thing that's ever happened to you. And at the same time, the mistake is to think that you've understood that experience, right? As soon as you come down from that place, your little brain is going to try to wrap itself around what's happened, and it's going to do its best to use whatever poor words it can to understand it. And the likelihood that those words aren't going to be a partial understanding at best, and most likely a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, is so high that you can at the same time say, I have this thing and it's valuable to me, but also I have the humility of saying, well, I don't know what the hell it means. I don't know what it means. Let me go to the philosophers to know what it means. Let me go to the theologians or the priests to try to work out what it means. They're the ones that are dealing with propositional analytical statements about what these things are. All right, I'm gonna shut up now. I've repeated myself, but does that track?
Yeah. Thanks. I was noticing here that Estival was requesting speaker, but Twitter, I think, is failing here on this regard. I'll try to invite him again and see if he can speak, because
Okay, that's a bummer. If you make me co-host, I'll add invites to everybody here, and if Twitter wants to not be annoying, then maybe it'll work while you read the next two poems. And if it doesn't work, I'll let you know when you're done. Hopefully it'll work.
Done. I've invited both. I've invited you as co-host and also Estival as speaker. Oh, go ahead, man.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, because every time I am elevated to speaker, the whole sound starts being gobbled up, and I can't hear what you're saying.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, like now, like Zara is just I can't hear much of anything. It's not intelligible. I maybe can just I don't know if is this essay somewhere to be found online or something, because it was really interesting. The difference, the objectivist, the structuralist, the oh god, what did you call the other ones, when you said it's not like postmodernism where everything is just like I feel like it is. And I was kind of intrigued, like, okay, what's the distinction between the first group, which you mentioned, and the second group?
Your connection is
oh,
quite,
my connection is bad too.
Quite shaky. Yeah,
So,
quite shaky.
Esteban,
Yeah.
if you can hear me, I've understood your question. I'll post the essay that I was reading from in the comments on the YouTube video, and also this is a course we're doing, so I'll put together the lecture notes and the slideshow, and I'll make those available at some point too, if you want to dig deeper.
Okay. So I can find them on the YouTube video link going on, because you're on 2-3 platforms now. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, you know what? I'll just post it to the jumbo while Roger reads the next 2 poems.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back to
word,
listener, because otherwise I can't hear
yeah,
anything.
every third word, every Estival, every third word that you say is blurted. It's phased out by the connection or whatnot.
Twitter is or X or whatever the hell you call it nowadays is just as shaky as it was before. Maybe even worse.
Yeah. Okay. So let's
okay,
go
but anyway,
forward with
thanks.
the next-
I'll go back to listen. Anyway, thanks.
Okay. Cheers, man. Okay. So the next. So the sheik is usually a wise guy, a wise person played with children. A certain young man was asking around, I need to find a wise person. I have a problem. A bystander said, there's no one with intelligence in our town except that man over there, playing with the children, the one riding the stick horse. He has keen, fiery insight and vast dignity, like the night sky, but he conceals it in the madness of child's play. The young seeker approached the children. Dear father, you who have become as a child, tell me a secret. Go away. This is not a day for secrets. But please, ride your horse this way, just for a minute. The sheik play galloped over. Speak quickly. I don't hold this one still for long. Whoops, don't let him kick you. This is a wild one. The young man felt he couldn't ask his serious question in the crazy atmosphere. So he joked, I need to get married. Is there someone suitable on this street? There are 3 kinds of women in the world. 2 are griefs, and 1 is a treasure to the soul. The first, when you marry her, is all yours. The second is half yours. And the third is not yours at all. Now get out of here before this horse kicks you in the head. Easy now. The sheik rode off among the children. The young man shouted, Tell me more about the kinds of women. The sheik, on his cane horsey, came closer. The virgin of your first love is all yours. She will make you feel happy and free. A childless widow is the second. She will be half yours. The third, who is nothing to you, is a married woman with a child. By her first husband she had a child, and all her love goes into that child. She will have no connection with you. Now watch out. Back away. I'm going to turn this rascal around. He gave a loud whoop and rode back, calling the children around him. One more question, master. The sheik circled. What is it? Quickly. The rider over there needs me. I think I'm in love. What is this playing that you do? Why do you hide your intelligence so? The people here want to put me in charge. They want me to be judge, magistrate, and interpreter of all the texts. The knowing I have doesn't want that. It wants to enjoy itself. I'm a plantation of sugarcane, and at the same time, I'm eating the sweetness. Knowledge that is acquired is not like this. Those who have it worry if audiences like it or not. It's a bait for popularity. Disputational knowing wants customers. It has no soul. Robust and energetic before a responsive crowd. It slumps when no one is there. The only real customer is God. Chew quietly your sweet sugar cane, God love, and stay playfully childish. Your face will turn rosy with illumination, like the red bud flowers. Okay, next one. The next one is called Sexual Urgency, What a Woman's Laughter Can Do, and the Nature of True Virility. Okay, so it goes like this. Someone offhand to the Caliph of Egypt. The king of Mosul has a concubine like no other, more beautiful than I can describe. She looks like this. He draws her likeness on paper. The Caliph drops his cup. Immediately he sends his captain to Mosul with an army of thousands. The siege goes on for a week with many casualties. The walls and the towers unsteady, as soft as wax. The king of Mosul sends an envoy. Why this killing? If you want the city, I will leave and you can have it. If you want more wealth, that's even easier. The captain takes out the piece of paper with the girl's picture on it. This. The strong king of Mosul is quick to reply. Lead her out. The idol belongs with the idolater. When the captain sees her, he falls in love, like the caliph. Don't laugh at this. This loving is also part of infinite love, without which the world does not evolve. Objects move from inorganic to vegetation, to selves endowed with spirit through the urgency of every love that wants to come to perfection. This captain thinks the soil looks fertile, so he sows his seed. Sleeping, he sees the girl in a dream. He makes love to her image, and his semen spurts out. After a while, he begins to wake. Slowly he senses the girl is not there. I have given my seed into nothing. I shall put this tricky woman to a test. A leader who is not a captain of his body is not one to be honored, with his semen spilling so in the sand. Now he loses all control. He doesn't care about the caliph or about dying. I am in love, he says. Do not act in such heat. Take counsel with a master. But the captain couldn't. His infatuation is a black water wave carrying him away. Something that doesn't exist makes a phantom appear in the darkness of a well. And the phantom itself becomes strong enough to throw actual lions into the hole. More advice. It is dangerous to let other men have intimate connections with the women in your care. Cotton and fire sparks. Those are, together, difficult, almost impossible to quench. The captain does not return straight to the caliph, but instead camps in a secluded meadow. Blazing, he can't tell ground from sky. His reason is lost in a drumming sound. Worthless radish and son of a radish, the caliph himself a gnat, nothing. But just as this cultivator tears off the woman's pants and lies down between her legs, his penis moving straight to the mark, there's a great tumult and the rising cry of soldiers outside the tent. He leaps up with his bare bottom shining and runs out, scimitar in hand. A black lion from a nearby swamp has gotten in among the horses. Chaos. The lion jumping 20 feet in the air, tents billowing like an ocean. The captain quickly approaches the lion, splits his head with one blow, and now he's running back to the women's tent when he stretches out her beauty again. His penis goes even more erect. The engagement, the coming together, is as with the lion. His penis stays erect all through it. and it does not scatter semen feebly. The beautiful one is amazed at his virility. Immediately, with great energy, she joins with his energy, and their two spirits go out from them as one. Whenever two are linked this way, there comes another from the unseen world. It may be through birth, if nothing prevents conception. But a third does come, when two unite in love, or in hate. The intense qualities born of such joining appear in the spiritual world. You will recognize them when you go there. Your associations bear progeny. Be careful, therefore. Wait and be conscious before you go to meet anyone. Remember, there are children to consider. Children you must live with and tend to, born of your emotions with one another. Entities with a form and speech and a place to live. They are crying to you even now. You have forgotten us. Come back. Be aware of this. A man and a woman together always have a spiritual result. The captain was not so aware. He fell and stuck like a gnat in a pot of buttermilk, absorbed in his love affair. A certain man asks an eloquent teacher, what is true and what is false? This is false. A bat hides it deeper into the cave. You have an idea of an enemy that attaches you to certain companions. Moses, the inner light of revelation, lit up the top of Sinai, but the mountain could not hold the light. Don't deceive yourself that way. Having the reality of anything, there's no courage and spiritual breathing can vanish. It's only a dream, a vanity, breath through a mustache. It would have killed you. There are the mouse might make. The penis droops. Is funny. Every emotion has a source and a key. The Caliph is furious. He draws his sword. What's so amusing? Tell me everything you're thinking. Don't hold tells all in great detail of the camp in the meadow, the killing of the lion, the captain's return to the tent with his penis still hard as the horn of a rhino, and the contrast with the caliph's own member sinking down because of one mouse whisper. Hidden things always come to light. Do not sow bad seed. Be sure they'll come up. Rain and the sun's heat make them rise into the air. Spring comes after the fall of the leaves, which is proof enough of the fact of resurrection. Secrets come out in spring, out from earth lips into leaf. Worries become wine headaches. But where did the wine come from? Think. A branch of blossoms does not look like seed. A man does not resemble semen. Jesus came from Gabriel's death, but he is not in that form. The grape doesn't look like the vine. Loving actions are the seed of something completely different, a living place. No origin is like where it leads to. We can't know where our pain is from. We don't know all that we've done. Perhaps it's best that we don't. Nevertheless, we suffer for it. The Caliph comes back to his clarity. In the pride of my power, I took this woman from another. Whoever commits adultery is a pimp for his own wife. If you cause injury to someone, you draw that same injury toward yourself. My treachery made my friend a traitor to me. This repetition must stop somewhere, here in an act of mercy. I'll send you back to the captain, saying another of my wives is jealous. And since the captain was brave enough to bring you back from Mosul, he shall have you in marriage. This is the virility of a prophet. The caliph was sexually impotent, but his manliness was most powerful. The kernel of true manhood is the ability to abandon sensual indulgences